Hello, friends, and welcome to a remote gathering of friends through Winston-Salem Friends Meeting. My name is Cheryl Bridges, and I will be bringing today's prepared message. And before we listen to those words, I'd like to invite you into some quiet space where you might center your heart and your mind and your spirit, settle in with all those who are listening in to this message, and join in a moment of silence to gather together. Today's message is entitled Betwixt and Between, and I'd like to start us off with a short quote from the poet William Blake. In the universe, there are things that are known and things that are unknown, and in between them, there are doors. My sister Tony is an innate master gardener who can bring any near-dead plant back to life. When she was just 10 years old, she dragged a fading dogwood tree down the street from a home construction site, dug a hole for it herself, and nurtured it until it was flourishing. 12 years later, that tree was still alive and well when our parents sold that house. Tony puts her gifts for gardening and nurturing new life to good use when it comes time for those fat yellow, white, and black caterpillars to shift into gorgeous black and orange monarch butterflies. She has lined her deck intentionally with milkweed plants so that when the eggs hatch and become caterpillars, they can stuff themselves on the leaves. The caterpillars then attach themselves by a thin, silky thread onto the safe spaces she's created on the deck railing, and they begin their metamorphosis. Crazy as it sounds, caterpillars essentially turn themselves inside out to create the cocoon in which their transformation takes place. What's left of their tender bodies melts into a soup-like goo that reshapes into a monarch butterfly. In a matter of about 2 weeks, the caterpillar's leaf-eating mouth is transformed into a long, slim straw from which the butterfly can sip nectar. Yet, no more solid food from there on. The 8 pairs of sturdy legs that helped the caterpillar crawl and creep shift into 3 pairs of fine legs that allow the butterfly to perch lightly on surfaces and on flowers. The caterpillar's eyesight changes dramatically from tiny eyes that can barely perceive light and dark into much keener, larger eyes. And on top of that, the butterfly develops reproductive organs that were non-existent in the caterpillar. Interestingly enough, the goo out of which a butterfly is formed contains stem cells called imaginal cells, as if with their imagination they can put themselves back together as something entirely new that didn't even exist before. I don't know about you, but for me, it feels as though 2020 has been a year of being in a cocoon. With the sudden shift into isolation that was experienced around the globe this past March, humanity itself has entered a state that feels like the caterpillar's chrysalis, a fragile sack of goo suspended by a tender thread. Through no fault of our own, we've stepped collectively into what is called liminal space. Liminal comes from the Latin word limen, L-I-M-E-N, meaning threshold. It's a place of being betwixt and between. What is familiar is no longer, and what is yet to be hasn't emerged. Franciscan friar, spiritual director, and author Richard Rohr writes extensively about living through liminality. He writes, "We usually enter liminal space when our former way of being is challenged or changed. Sometimes that could be through no fault of our own or from something that we instigate. But he says it is a graced time, but it often doesn't feel grace-filled in any way. In such space, we are not certain, nor are we in control. We can't put the genie back into the bottle." It isn't just a global pandemic that lets the genie out of the bottle to begin with. Liminality happens at a number of ages and stages in every human's life, whether it's starting to school, being born is itself liminality. We might get married or divorced, start a new job, change careers, or even as we age and die. The Judeo-Christian scriptures are replete with stories that are based in these in-between places where liminality happens. Tombs, wilderness, mountaintops, and deserts. They often are an indication that the person in the story is facing transition and transformation. The children of Israel lived in liminal space as they wandered the desert for 40 years in search of the promised land. I'm sure if we could speak to them today, they'd tell us how scary and unsettling that liminality was. Being in between can feel like living in limbo, especially because we're not in control of the circumstances or of the outcomes. We often don't know which direction to turn in first. It can leave us bothered and bewildered, if not bewitched. The children of Israel did all they could to resist this place of uncertainty. They did a lot of murmuring, belly aching, and talking behind the backs of Moses, Aaron, and Deborah, their leaders. Their desire to return to who they used to be and what they used to be and where they used to be was so strong They actually begged to get back to Egypt and back into slavery. How does that old saying go? Better the devil you know than the devil you don't know. And who can blame them? This place of betwixt and between is so full of tension, even as it is full of grace. In many ways, it's the death of status quo. It's the death of how we've always done things. The rules are different, and all bets are off. We're way out of our comfort zone when we stand on this threshold between before and after. Another Franciscan priest and author, Andrew Mays, writes, "What had been a barrier now becomes a stepping stone into a larger spiritual adventure. The liminal space into which Jesus leads us are places of radical unmaking and unlearning, and if I might add, undoing and unraveling. They're uncomfortable spaces where we are called to be utterly vulnerable to God, and from which we will re-enter the world, transform. The lemon is the place of departure. It's a springboard into a fresh way of doing things." Yes, there is a flip side to liminality. Standing on the verge of what's to be, we have rich opportunities to transform ourselves. Rather than reaching for pat answers that are familiar and former ways that are also familiar, we can intentionally sit with what's unfamiliar and look creatively at possible ways forward. We can identify what is working and what's ready to be recreated so that we can rise to higher heights. We can engage our imaginations, just like the imaginal cells, and our keen sight and insight to reconstruct a way of being that comes out of what has been deconstructed. In addition to creativity and imagination, living in liminal space calls for deep trust. Instead of resisting an unknown future like Jonah in the belly of a whale, we are called to trust God. We're called to trust others, those in our families or those in our culture, in our environment, in our community. We're also called to trust ourselves in ways maybe we've never trusted ourselves before. And lastly, we're called to trust the process of life, to discern to take the next right step, what that step might be even, or to let things go for now. Hebrews 11 also reminds us that we need to have faith as we move through the unknown. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things unseen. As we remain in a place of vulnerability and transition, what the poet Rumi called the womb of transformation, it's also helpful to do some deep reflection. Take an honest look at yourself and at your situation. Rather than batten the hatches against any type of change or circle the wagons to protect the way you've always done things, the way you've always lived your life, take some time to acknowledge exactly how did you get to where you are? What is your hope for the future? What are the things that you are not seeing that you feel convicted about? What is in your life that feels like it's run its course. Maybe it's reached its expiration date. What is life-giving enough for you to bring it forward into the future with you, even if you're not sure how you're going to live it? What drains your energy and drains your spirit? And what fills up your cup? Organizational change consultant Christine McDougall describes this beautifully. She says, "The space between neither this nor that, ripe and potent, uncertain and shaky, the imminent threshold emerging, crossing to what? Slow down. The moment is calling you to pay exquisite attention." And if I might take her words and paraphrase Friedrich Buechner, pay attention, pay exquisite attention for your answers, whatever they are. They're not telling you something, they're not only telling you something about the secret of who you are, but more often than not, God is speaking to you through them of the mystery of where you have come from, and is summoning you to where, if your soul is to be saved, you should go next. And so it is. Amen.